This is the sound test for today, Friday, for the first session. We have 2 today. It is part number 13, and I hope everything works well.
den jambe yon la jaza lo kange lo de demne den ni dra nam da rab sarave jinye den ge je ze che ni ke le won ze konda se be zhen ma dung ne che ze ve ro so gun la pu je tar se yin la tu je yon den song ro tre che do ni mo ni no le je cha do don ze che Bizra Jinye Janza Rajanam Dene Dajin Saju Tarsun Yunten Luzu Jase Tuviku Chontra Chodan Chunye Jent Dagle Muzan Jambe Yunla Amara Bazanada Amara Bazanada Ramzanada 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 Amara Bazanada Ramzanada
Okay, so the first question is, does water contain all 4 or 5 elements, or only the water element and the empty space element? And is the empty space only composed by the space element? Det är det då. Da chukamina chukamla kamngakala yödame yang mena chukamdela chui kam yimbache teneyang namke kan yimbache dingi mato me paravi tene namke kam te tella kam känta yödame
Tandere tanda kam yibote ge durchi la kam yika yote shukche chong de chepar de sheku yote
in terms of the 4 first in the list of 5 elements, numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, in terms of their composition, are made up of all 4. It's just that when one speaks of, for example, the water element, the point of categorizing it as an element separate from the others, in spite of it being composed of all 4, or all 4 to begin with, is that the water element is the element among the 4 which is predominant and which has the greatest strength.
Namke kam singete konje pasam jere mato namke ze singje meva sungza
Namke kare?
Namke ze. Chesa yindaru luto goguyo.
Now empty space is just that, empty space, and it was explained that it provides room for anything else to occur in and to function in. However, that element is composed of, as it were, just empty space. Di na yang dang pu shi la yang nam ke kam yo ma re.
Namke kam tongcha yugro, tongcha tenen namke kam chebre.
However, if you look at the composition of the others, in terms of matter, all four are at hand, but of course, in terms of the subtle material particles involved, there is space between the different elements. So even within the first four, there is the presence of number 5 as well. The next question is, you talked about actions which could restore life. For example, buying animals destined for sacrifice, as well as other virtuous actions. Could you please give some examples of virtuous deeds? Chavaden deang sodi yar soyagi kariyodam triyesar.
Tak de sonam ge chosa yetre, kuncho ge ten cheba pulye. Daga na sing lamga jye.
Karichoya?
Memang lamga zoye. Samba jye. Tene ta phel ta de luksen da menda yor.
There are many virtuous deeds that would have the same effect, such as making offerings to the 3 jewels, for example, such as constructing roads, bridges, and the like in areas where people haven't had access to that type of infrastructure.
Penan ta triga son longba de tonra wuchi cha yana Jacob ge dingzu bi che do de lamga zo ya ro pa go ya yo mare daga na shin ke samba chu ya go ya yo mare ma to de lu ju te na tende ge dingzu me de concept chi le chi ro go na yang kala kha yo ro tende ge lam chu je ye.
Now, in this part of the world, where we are right now, on the European continent, and in other parts of the so-called developed world, for better or for worse, charity, in terms of providing funds for the construction of roads, bridges, and so on, isn't really necessary. It's provided by the government, and the government is able to see to the infrastructure because of collecting tax or taxes from the population at large. So there is a system where this runs independently of charities and so on. However, in the past, for example, and in the present in many parts of the world, if there weren't charities that constructed roads, bridges, and the like, it means both in the past and in the present that people then wouldn't even be able to travel to the next village of their region because there are no roads, there are no bridges, and there this kind of charity work is very important for the population of these areas.
Pena Pogla men on Tape Gata Chisho Lama Chire, Trochin Tondon Jarosingit. Johnson Ngapchung Ngadu in a Jamdua.
Ngapchungatuk?
Yeah.
in terms of Tibet's Buddhist history, during the 14 and 1500s in Tibet, a very well-known Tibetan Buddhist master, Tangtong Gyalpo, lived and worked. And he, among other things, had 56 bridges constructed, suspended, and secured on either side of a large river, for example, by way of large iron chains. And because of that, he became known as the constructor of iron bridges, and apparently he lived till the age of 125 years. And apparently he collected, by way of request, from individuals who had access to iron ore, and the iron, he collected the iron ore, had it processed and so on and so forth, and then had these bridges constructed or built. And in today's world, there are quite a few regions where famine rages, and it would be a very good idea to contribute to charities that have food programs in those regions, because giving food to these people will make the difference between life and death for them. If not fed, if there are no contributions, then these people will die of starvation. So one actually saves lives by way of such contributions, for example. So, in our part of the world, a lot of food is just wasted. People buy too much food, it goes old, it's then thrown away. People put too much food on their plates and just put the leftovers into the garbage. Simply, there is a lot of that going on in our part of the world. Now, rather than behaving in this way, it would be better to focus on contributing to feeding other human beings who do not have access to food, as well as animals, also trapped in areas where there is drought and the like, and therefore the animals die of starvation because nothing grows there anymore. So rather than business as usual, as it were, in terms of putting too much food on your plate without ever reflecting over doing so, it would be better to sort of get a grip on one's mindset and start thinking about how to contribute food to those who do not have food. So in Mahayana Buddhism there are numerous ways in which merit can be accumulated, methods by which merit can be accumulated and thus saving lives. Da salungi yoga la sopa la tenne shen shimigova cheju sungyo and in the Buddhist Tantras, also known as the Vajrayana, if one looks at the Buddhist practitioner himself and that he may have, for example, a life-threatening condition, health condition, there are many methods there as well, such as samadhi in the context of nadis, prana and bindu, as well as the reciting of specific mantras with accompanied by a meditation and so on and so forth. Also methods designed to cure the practitioner of the condition he's in or struck down by in order to save his life. What's the difference between suffering of change and the human suffering of being separated from what we are attached to?
Dinil chaprakari yor sirwa.
Lari.
Tachita ko jurvek chane jurvek dungai singete yungu yorla yin yang suffering chene kakan produ. Well, change very often results in suffering, and in addition, the change may also bring about the additional feature of separation from what one wants to keep, or separation from a person, and so on and so forth, which then causes additional suffering. Penandi hubra, Jurwa Singente, Jadan Jurwate, Jua Yimba Hakuna.
Now, in terms of suffering in the context of change, the individual who has a comprehensive understanding of change wouldn't suffer because of change, because he knows that whatever he has right now is in and of itself change. Therefore, he knows that whatever is at hand right now won't last. He knows that from the very start of whatever is at hand. And when that something comes to an end, he won't suffer, because he knew all along that this would happen. Mm-hmm. In the teaching of the Four Noble Truths, it's said that the origin of suffering, the afflictive and obscuring states, and their actions Khenpo Rinpoche spoke of the origin of suffering as the belief in a self. Why these two presentations?
Yes.
Lasso.
Kunjung dembe kabla ledang yuan mongpa dungan jong ju chepre. Yom le nyon yit. Yom senge de kana tene yungudo sida. Tene te dakto tawe namto shinjo londel tene yungu yorwa. Changme zawa te daktar he de yor.
Now it is taught in the context of the second of the Four Noble Truths, that the origin of all suffering is that of afflictive, obscuring states and their actions. And the origin of afflictive, obscuring states and their actions is the belief in a self. So to begin with, the belief in itself, it's sort of implied that it's included within the origin of all suffering. If there is no belief in a self, if an individual doesn't have this idea that he truly exists, then afflictive, obscuring states such as passion and aggression wouldn't happen. There would be no reason for either passion or aggression. Now, worldly individuals have, since time immemorial, believed in themselves, as it were, as real. In effect of which, passion, aggression, and ignorance are very deep-rooted. They've been at work, these afflictive, obscuring states have been at work since time immemorial, because of the notion of a self. Without the notion of a self, they would not emerge. The well-known Indian Buddhist master of old, Aryadeva, said that a person who were to just give some thought to the topic of emptiness, to the topic of no self, in that some doubt has stirred within, some doubt has emerged in his mind as to whether the person is as real as he believes. That slight doubt, that questioning the self, is very fortunate, Aryadeva explained. And a person without a great deal of merit would never ask himself that question.
rikpa tan nyamne da drava ina te dame ba thacho gri te korak.
So the person who's asked this question would then seek an answer and would seek advice, information and so on, and by way of logic, reasoning, investigation and so on, he could therefore develop an understanding of no-self, or he can therefore develop an understanding of no-self. And that kind of person would be a person with a high capacity as to his intellect. If there are pests or parasites that endanger the life or health of another being, how does one deal with this as a Buddhist? Because one knows that there are medications and treatments that would kill these parasites if used. So what do you do as a Buddhist?
That means that you say you know?
Tripanangla Buchung and the Tune, not a söne. Tene mensana the she drogeravas. Ting rangi se sharava. Da nang bayina kandeche gore did. Then she chungwayina.
That the Masakami Ravashumina, that when at Hane, that ending the show in a young till the paint of the shed, monum yet, then it gets a druna, the patient Jigme. Now, Lama Kashik on Mazaya Sungutu.
Well, there are various views. Some spiritual guides say it's preferable not to take those medications or use these treatments, whereas others advise that if one's condition, because of the parasites or the pests, is life-threatening, in order to save one's life, one could take the medication or have the treatment in question while praying for Busin Travala Sopa in the Kevaya Sangpo.
Yeah, need to be
praying for the good rebirth of the parasites, for example, if that's at hand. There is the following passage regarding the suffering of old age in the precious Jewel Ornament. The diminishing strength of our merits. Anyway, the quotation is incomplete. The question is, what is merit? Is it material or immaterial? How does it work? Do we accumulate more merit using Buddhist practices? Can we make merit available for others? What is the link between marriage and old age, as it is mentioned in the Jewel Ornament?
Tati gave us the dread.
Ta kanske ena sådan den så chick treated och hinner gör kanske några lojen och jag säger bara kan ha cosa me. Leunga pa nang la yusare. Leunga pa nang la duse.
Yes, gave the marche coming, sir.
Insara ba?
Yeah.
Tene anni da de ben porre da mari. Så nam sekinde. Yang kan det ju riktigt ina.
Das so nem sekinde kan sund. Neme. Tan di dire doa. Tanda Sönam yongsun jurwa singite.
Sönam kare?
Sönam yongsun jurwa.
Sönam yongsun jurwa sena?
Sönam yongsun jurwa singite ngarang la longjo yoba tenzo kanga se. Tene ngarang la wangtang dawa yoba tenzo kanga ma trine. Tene pe chanruwa tene sönam sebe tari chebre.
Daddy Gepe Dungal.
Yeah, gave a couple of days.
Well, in terms of merit and old age, Gampopa says in the text that indications of decline of merit are that the old person, for example, loses the wealth he has previously accumulated, he loses influence he had previously, and so on. So when a person ages, decline takes place, and it takes various shapes and forms, and some of these circumstances are the ones just mentioned. Because of old age, one is no longer able to maintain what one previously had in terms of wealth, influence, and the like. And that happening indicates that one's merit is declining. Because if the old person had a great deal of merit, that wouldn't happen. So in this sense, one finds connections of this type between merit and aging or old age. However, this doesn't mean that this happens to each and every old person. No. When this sort of thing happens to an older person, it's a sign of his merit declining. So the fact that someone is able to, for example, amass great wealth in a lifetime is an indication of good deeds in previous lives, by way of which the person has accumulated merit, and he has also in that life acted in manners favorable to the ripening of that merit. So it's not as if you've accumulated merit and then it just manifests. It's not like having a bank account suddenly and you can withdraw from it whenever. No, there are also additional features in terms of the ripening of the merit, the fruits of the good deeds, namely the person's behavior in a specific lifetime, behavior favorable to the ripening of the merit in question. That's also needed.
Sonam sama tu che sarab meme sakya be sonam ki that zona te rong pango rego te tu dunge yorwa geo sarab mamala sonam sakya ba ti tendu ta dong sonam to sang ma tum na ko zo lu ji jala ro
dyla mamina tene yang digi drebo longma chö pachik chagre sungin luge kande chik sungin
per na nge sonam sa
re kebanga magi se
ya ta tanda ngal long chö ye long chö yogin sonam ma sa wa che
yes.
long chö te chang chang la
if in a lifetime this occurs, the ripening of good deeds, the effect, the amassing of, for example, great wealth. It's also necessary that the person who's achieved this continues to act in virtuous ways. Otherwise, a process of decline would set in. So, as was just said, it's not a bank account where you always have a certain amount which you can withdraw portions of from time to time. Having in this life, because of previous good actions, amassed great wealth, in order for that to not decline, you also need to continue to engage in virtuous deeds. It's not as if you have the wealth and then you can do whatever. It doesn't work like that either.
Jirtang tas sunam sa gewa cheba yinandra ten dikpam be gewa cheba yinandra
Sunam sa gewa tini
gewa cheba ten sunam sa gyorwa me gewa cheba ten ne sunam mayimba sa gyorwa.
So in general, virtue makes for the accumulating of so-called merit. However, keep in mind that merit is not something static like a sum of money in a bank account. And non-virtue results in the opposite. Non-virtuous actions make for the accumulating of unfavorable conditions, conditions and circumstances of suffering.
And
you shouldn't think that virtue versus non-virtue is something very simple. it isn't. In fact, it's very complex in terms of the accumulating of merit by way of a virtuous lifestyle and the accumulating of suffering by way of a non-virtuous lifestyle.
Penna dikpa chenayanda, gewa chenayanda, yulke tenne chechong shiran rungre.
With reference to the object of your actions, there is a great deal of difference in terms of how much virtue or the degree of the merit because of the virtue will be. And there is also a lot of difference in terms of the degree of your suffering because of non-virtuous actions with reference to the recipient or recipients of your actions.
Penna yulgi chane chepa pulwe yulla kuncho samdravo. Kuncho samki tendravo. Yang mena range gevishi nyendravo. Yang mena range pamandravo la yaku chena yang getsa di shuk chembore, dukja chena yang dikba di shuk chembore.
So you have various recipients of your, for example, virtuous actions. You may make offerings to the three jewels. The recipients, as it were, the three jewels, are the objects of refuge and would, in terms of the path to enlightenment, play a great role. Therefore, the merit resulting from the virtuous deeds of making offerings to them is greater than the virtue accumulated by way of helping your neighbor out, for example. Then you have your parents that are the recipients of many of your actions. And in terms of virtuous actions, as to your relationship with your parents, there again, the merit accumulated by these virtuous deeds in connection with one's parents is also of a very high degree, in that the recipients, your parents, are individuals who have cared for you and so on in so many ways, and therefore deserve a virtuous response, as it were. Then you have, for example, spiritual guides who selflessly assist you in your efforts as to making progress on the path to enlightenment. And virtuous deeds, with respect to them, also make for a very high degree or level of merit, simply because of them truly deserving your response.
Tegana shinge yul nepa tan game pa lapar to ngaranza tuba tunro dami gring den zon pinje ta tunna when I get a shuk chembo telene jina digba shuk chembo roviar.
Then you have individuals who have, for example, fallen ill, and because of the illness are utterly helpless, cannot care for themselves. You have people who are destitute to act in virtuous ways towards these individuals, assisting them in whatever way one can. The merit by way of those virtuous deeds is of a higher level than, again, if you were to help out your neighbor with something. Your neighbor who is in good health and whatnot. And this applies also to animals who are destitute. Stray dogs, stray cats, animals in the wild who are struck down by drought or whatever, and therefore can't feed themselves. To assist those in circumstances of helplessness makes for a very high level of merit, and evidently therefore to do the opposite with respect to, for example, those in circumstances of helplessness, not helping them out, turning away from them and the like, the degree of suffering accumulated by way of that non-virtuous behavior is also of a very, very high degree. And the same would apply to the previous recipients. So rather than making offerings to the three jewels, a person may disparage the three jewels, which makes for the accumulating of suffering of a high degree, and the same in terms of treatment towards spiritual guides, parents. The suffering accumulated by non-virtuous behavior is of a very high degree.
Penna mit pangu chela pangu jatam bala to tevale thunro tokpa chila to tevate sunum sa tu chekte.
Och pangu chikta kallar till sig Chödrak.
No pangu jatam bala to tevale. Kalam minkin jatam bala to tevale. Sitik to draw chikla to tevate. Sitik to draw chila.
Da det pedi. Men du sikter kogen.
Ja, pango jadan ba de yöver chero. Tele trin khala tele thang.
Yes.
Chitto saji mem chila tote venchen. Chitela tote
venchen. Chi sange de shogen då. Pango jadan patenso kalla pedi mepa in samarava.
Ta me therwa pango jadan ba trin saju mebe che. Tenge saju chite ba thang. Chi saju meba chil to teba chana.
Ti kongen dula.
Te pangu jatham bal to trin saju me na ya rwa.
Yeah.
Ko yin la rong she grwa. Chi rong she gma.
So then you have the situation of perhaps encountering a group of 100 beggars. Who that day do not have anything to eat and who therefore beg you to feed them. And at the same time there is just one stray dog who is starving. Now, if you were to feed the 100 beggars, the merit, because of that virtuous action, is lesser than if you were to feed that one starving animal. Why? Because human beings have an intellect which makes it possible for them to think of ways of how to get food the next day. So even if today they didn't get fed, they can make strategies and plans in terms of changing the way they are looking for food so that they get food, whereas an animal doesn't have that type of intellect. An animal is not that smart and can therefore not figure out how to change his strategy. He doesn't have one. He's simply just looking for food. So his situation of helplessness is far more serious than the helplessness situation of the 100 beggars. Therefore, the degree of merit accumulated by feeding the stray dog is greater than feeding 100 beggars for a day. And then you have a lot of variations in terms of the degree of merit accumulated with reference to your motivation for doing whatever you're doing. So in terms of the three jewels, the spiritual guides, if the offerings made are made because of trust and confidence in them, because of devotion for them, the higher the degree of the devotion, the higher the merit accumulated, the higher level of merit will be accumulated. Mm-hmm. And in terms of those deserving of your compassion, such as individuals in circumstances of helplessness, the stronger your compassion for them is, the higher the level of the merit you accumulate will be. Then of course there will be a higher level of merit in terms of a greater extent of good actions with respect to the various recipients that were listed. Also, some people who've done a lot of good for whatever reason regret that later, and that of course, the regret of course will reduce the force of the merit accumulated. The best is, according to Buddhism, to dedicate the merit one has accumulated by whatever actions towards the enlightenment of all. Because then one has selflessly, as it were, donated the merit one accumulated towards the good of all, and therefore it will not go to waste. So in terms of virtuous deeds, it's very important to know how to go about the virtuous deeds for them to be effective, as it were. Uh-huh. About the intermediate state, Khenpo Rinpoche says, in the bardo, the being is aware of its new rebirth. What is he aware of? The place of the birth? Does he see his future parents, or simply is it simply his own will to be born again that is at hand? Daddy, bardola jöken så ngonche du som sånga. Ta ngonche digi ken chene tinida keva sarpa digi shege ore som som. Det keva sarpa she setu kangla kogo gelu.
Tandere penna bardo lechi ngambar shepa tege pama kandu yoba tang pama terchegi yoba shoshoji shegi yore ina ender lo mitimbe ngoshe wa gambar tende ngoshe mare
re selfo shegi mendo
sarvo shegi mare
in terms of this level of clairvoyance, which is not born out of a stable meditation state, it's what one may term regular or worldly clairvoyance. There is, I don't know if one would say that, but perhaps one could say there is a bit of an idea of who the future parents are, for example. Pama teni suyin teni lungpa kala yu. It's rather a bit of a foggy idea as to knowledge of the place of rebirth as well as the parents. It's not as if the individual in this state clearly knows each and every detail. It's a bit like a foggy idea.
And
it's not as if this idea remains once it has surfaced, because the mindset of the individual in this state is one of sudden changes. So on and off, there is this foggy idea of what's next, but then the individual forgets and other things happen, and then this foggy idea resurfaces. It's more like that. I would like the prayer of Manjushri mentioned by Khenpo Rinpoche. I would like the prayer. Where do I ask? Is there an initiation for it? If so, I would like to ask under what circumstances. Tadi jam yangi tupa dengan so dengar bata chuten regi gola tadi midigi kondisjon gundu da dönde ju sarava da della wongo gere tam tene kavajogo re dende dön choya shik tope chetu sonde shiki trige saravo
tajada te that jamyon the tepara chendam bayina jamroda semche te end
da ku kalaina jogo mari songyora
that bochara
camrodan semche de dön
de then ti tepate jurshavat de yonandra beget holun de shegi yonandra so what them ne thongbutin dön
well, in terms of someone new to this praise to Manjushri, the best would be to begin by taking refuge in the three jewels and to generate the body-mind and then recite the praise in question. Either in a translation or the Tibetan text, if you're able to do that. There are other ways of practicing or other perspectives of practice in the context of this praise to Manjushri, but a beginner can simply begin like that, and one doesn't need for going to someone and ask for permission to do this or not. One can just go ahead. Now, whenever you encounter a spiritual guide of some level of accomplishment, it would be a good idea to request a so-called reading transmission of the praise in question. Then later on, if, for example, you're able to travel to some place where the present Karmapa gives the empowerment of Manjushri, you could go there in order to attend the empowerment, and in consequence of having received empowerment, you could then be given meditation instructions in terms of the kind of meditation done based on this praise to Manjushri. So that's all for this question and answer session.
Huh?
We have half an hour. Till 5.
5 batteries. Okay, then.
So next question is, Khenpo Rinpoche tells us that it's good that the family of the deceased perform virtuous actions to improve the conditions of the deceased. Nevertheless, in Dakpotajen, it is said that we can share our karma, only we ourselves, that we cannot. These two pieces of information seem contradictory.
Lots. Then did it, Penna. The Chetan lesson get the Lagosha J. Yomarwa.
In general, the results of previous actions cannot be shared by others.
Yin Yang,
However,
Shifu said the Chödrak, she would run a big yorwa.
in terms of arranging for virtue done on behalf of the deceased person, you have the feature of the virtue being done for the deceased person. And that's different from you experiencing the results of your personal actions of the past.
Tan de la Penna Rotang Minda Mangoy. Tapana Shivu said to Chödrak La. Jigme Lingpa.
And there are many ways in which this can be done.
Penna ta pherd habuchi na donganika tardeve longbar. Ti yente shibu de shitsarne tene tangbongi song jungju kichin kortan so sharshe.
Now in Old Tibet and still in Tibet, within the framework of Tibetan Buddhism, practitioners practice both Mahayana Buddhism and the Buddhist Tantras. So there is various ways, there are many different methods in terms of how to benefit a deceased person. One of them would be to one method found in the Buddhist Tantras would be that of having the mandala with the purpose of purifying actions that would propel an individual into a rebirth in the three lower actions to be performed.
And
that would last for a period of 49 days.
Songha choga tang tu karchegi yorsana ta pana ta choga songking ke lama zo rawti zo lama tere ta lama soge shibun namshe de chu guk.
Now, of course, in terms of doing this, those performing the ritual would have to have some level of spiritual attainment, which permit them or which make them able to call upon the mental body of the deceased individual. And then explain the practice of taking refuge in the three jewels to the deceased individual. As well as giving instructions in terms of how to generate the body mind. Followed by an empowerment for the deceased individual. Followed by further instructions in terms of practicing the path. Whether this can occur depends upon the capacity of the guru, the lama, who presides over these rituals for that period of 49 days. There are many more details here, and there are also other methods. However, we won't have time to go into further details. Now, this method, just mentioned in brief, as well as other similar methods, are different from the explanations of or found in the Jewel Ornament of Liberation. Khenpo Rinpoche evoked the possibility of being reborn in a pure land thanks to the connection that the practitioner develops with his Lama and H.H. Karmapa. Could he develop this point? Oh, I see. Because when I was a child, this person says, I had the impression that if I was in this world, it was because I had missed something, and now I don't want it to happen again. I can't say that I understand the question really. Tadi injudere då lama chiktang dralvanye po yodu tene da bardo nang la rome tene lama tiki da rang la de pa yo pa che la sopa de la tenne shintak pala tri tuggiore lama kongi da lama topa yo gönso det kan det skina tene mitike ko pugo yindu tene korangi samlo dendishik tangin se jikten de la cheve yumsen te chik masheva som det chikla tenne yang mena majung var som det chikla tenne ken chene jikten de la chere trensong se tenne da de da dagbe shingla drondu yö som chik säga men då
ja
sen på sanne min då ta trivante
penata kazange shushure lama tene pena jawa kama pandawo shamar pandawo ta mone sangchur samba yingushe ba chila rang de deber lo shuk chembo ji yena tene shin takwa le je thup suma re tan jektin din nan ngajo che goya de da ma chong ten ten re da me pala da tu tawal tene ngajo che de re chana chikbu mare ngaran zo changma ma chong
well, the common denominator in terms of what is responsible for us being reborn in a worldly existence is the belief in a self. That's why we are here. Or that's the reason for yet another rebirth in yet another worldly existence. Tene?
Tene ta lama kanma pandawo chila so atep thuna.
Now, if one, as a Buddhist practitioner, has the capacity to properly focus upon, for example, the Karmapa or the Shamarpa in one's prayers, supplicating both or either of them, because as was explained, for the kind of thing you mentioned, namely rebirth in a pure land to happen, it takes that the spiritual guide who you connect with have the capacity to guide you to that kind of rebirth. So someone of an enlightened mindset. So in terms of having the capacity to properly connect in this way, then there is the possibility of rebirth in a pure land. However, it depends on the individual whether that takes place or not. It depends on one's own capacity here, one's own mindset. Tenida Sangye dan Changshub Sempagit Sen Dömpati Kangi Pechanangla Yori, da di Dönju Yori, da Sosogi Minyepola Sopa Shito, di Densu Dengore, Song Yosaravangi Manga Trangimendo.
Penna Tango, upon maybe saying, Sanje Min like saying, Shakja to be saint and Dua.
Re Pecha Kanginangla.
That
Logore Chigindo.
Yes, Javasana, Sanje Saint Hamja Shoji, the Dusha Dodechi Yot. Sanje Tsimbom Sere.
There is, for example, did I read out the question? Where to find the prayers reciting the names of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as you assist someone dying? There is a sutra which lists the names of 1,000 Buddhas. It would be a good idea to recite those names in the presence of a dying person.
That in dragon doted and the low shinking men are young, Penna Tongashabun doden dunda.
Now, if you're a person not used to recite a lot, as it were, you may find that difficult. Something more brief that would also be good to recite is a sutra which lists the names of 37 Buddhas and
35.
35 Buddhas. Accompanied by a meditation where one acknowledges previous non-virtue, regrets that having happened, and so on and so forth. This is a much shorter text, so if you're a person who's not used to recite lengthy texts, that would be one option.
Then that in rain to Mindona, Sanje mean like chogat do tendek namba, mean like Chi Yeg Tsing Yorba.
Yegi.
Yeah, Sanje Yeg Tsing Yor.
Now, if that is also too lengthy for you, there is a very brief meditation text in terms of the medicine Buddha, which lists the names of 8 Buddhas. So if that's sort of what you would be able to do, you could choose that shorter meditation text.
That in the teaching in Nang, but the drag tap Mindra of Pemangboyod. Sanje Tsing them and Dodden Pemindra Mangoyod.
Other than that, there are many different sutras that list the names of various numbers of Buddhas.
Lasso. Takata then.
Did a typa in Sarigo?
Turby.
Den så jag gör till det koran så inji våge min dose. Kan resna tanda la triva mambudu. Då det sarsamare tränne. Till den så du så göna lensona du så mena masona jag rik som det gick tridu.
Turba.
Typa.
Okay, that channel is just Sunam de Yatam Jezigma, Tomnan Yebe, Danam Pamjet, Jega Naje, Balab Chubai, Sive, Tolando, Wado, Kiki Wutu.